Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we are just going to do a lot of yapping because I wanted to talk about some of my fall favorites and maybe give you some inspiration for some books to pick up this fall season. But I don't know about you guys. Not only does my book taste change during the fall, but I also feel like my taste in music and movies also shifts during the fall. So I wanted to make a couple of little honorable mentions with regard to the types of music and the movies that I'm preferring to pick up now that it's fall time. And I feel like I can officially say that it is fall time because it has been like 60 degrees or lower today, and there are leaves on the ground. And I am just so happy to actually need to put on a jacket to go outside. I'm so ready for full fall season. So I feel like this is the perfect timing for this video, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Also, this is completely unrelated to the topic of this video, but I just got this sweatshirt. Hopefully I'm not killing you with the mic, but I just got this sweatshirt. I don't know if you can really see it, but it's from The Fox and the Hound, which is one of my all-time favorite Disney movies, and I love the sweatshirt so much. I am so obsessed with it, and it's like perfectly oversized. So just had to give a little shout out to The Fox and the Hound, which I will say is a super cozy movie that I would watch during the fall season because I feel like it's super fitting. But in addition to that, I wanted to share some of my favorite Halloween movies. And if you're similar in age to me, you might have similar tastes. So I definitely grew up watching a lot of Disney's Halloween movies or the movies that used to come on TV. So in particular, Halloween Town is always one of the movies that I try to make time to watch during the fall season, as well as Hocus Pocus, of course. Now, I will say I didn't enjoy the second one as much, but I feel like I do tend to feel that way. I feel like it was just one of those topics that we didn't really need to touch again. We didn't need to try to recreate the magic of the original Hocus Pocus movie, but the original one will always be a fall favorite for me. And this is kind of a throwback, which I don't know. Again, if you're my age, you might not know this one, but my mom, one of her favorite fall movies or horror movies is Signs, which is about aliens. And I grew up watching that movie, and it's now one of my favorite fall traditions to rewatch Signs every year. So that's definitely one that I always watch, and I'm always quoting that one. Definitely an all-time favorite for me. And then as far as music goes, I definitely get into more like jazzy R&B style music and some like moodier music, as well as listening to more rock music, which I love these genres all the time, but I just feel like I kind of shift moods with the season in my music taste, which I think is really interesting. So right now I'm listening to a lot of Lake Street Dive and Lawrence. I really enjoy the both of them, as well as I kind of get back into like my folklore Evermore era around this time. If you're a fan of Taylor Swift's music, I wouldn't really consider myself a big Swiftie, but I do really like those two albums in particular, and I think it's because they are a lot moodier and they kind of fit the fall vibe. I definitely listen to Cardigan a lot in the fall season. I think one of the things that always hits me is that fall is such a nostalgic time of year, and so I listen to a lot of the music that I listened to growing up because my dad really likes rock music. So I find myself revisiting a lot of that. But I would love to know if you have favorite movies or music that you shift to watching during the fall season. Please tell me down below because I'm always looking for more recommendations to expand my horizons. But with that being said, let's get into what you're here for, which are the book recommendations. So, as far as fall books go, I have a few different categories that I want to share with you, and I'll try to keep it really brief for each book because y'all know I can yap, and I really don't want this video to be like an hour long. So, we'll kind of breeze through these. But if you have any questions or you want to talk more about a book, I'd be happy to connect more in the comments about any of them. So, just feel free to drop any questions down below. But the first category that I want to talk about are our cozy fall reads. And I feel like a lot of people tend to think cozy fantasy anytime you mention cozy reads, but I would say that these really aren't technically fantasy. I would say one of the series I'm going to recommend is fantasy, but the rest are just kind of cozy fall reads. So the first one was a book that I actually read during summer week, which was The X Hex, and this was super fun. I mentioned that Halloween Town is one of my favorite Halloween movies, and I really feel like The X Hex gave the exact same vibes as Halloween Town, but aged up a little bit. So if you love that vibe, you'll love this too. I also love The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, and if you haven't read any of Ashley Poston's books, I would say that this is one of my favorites of hers, along with The 7 Year Slip. And The Dead Romantics actually features a character that is a ghost, and there's a lot about ghost in here. So I really think this is a great cozy read for the fall. And then the last cozy-ish read that I'm going to recommend is going to be the Assistant to the Villain series. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of the first book because I read it on Kindle, but this is a trilogy and this is the third book in the series. So obviously there's a villain in this and lots of crazy things happening. And I feel like because this centers on a woman who is helping and potentially falling for a villain, that this one fits really well in the fall season as opposed to some other cozier fantasies that are a little bit more slice of life. I feel like this one and some of the content in it really, really fits for the fall. So if you're looking for a cozy read for the fall, I would say that any of these three would be perfect for that. And I would love to know if you have any other cozy fall reads that you would recommend, because this is an area that I'm just recently expanding into. So I would love to hear your recommendations. And then the second category that I feel like I always turn to during this time of year are dark academia reads, and some that get a little bit darker than just dark academia. So one of these recs definitely has some gory material in it. So I would say it definitely lends itself to the fall and Halloween season, but I would put it in the category of dark academia. So the first book that I would recommend that I also recently read was A Study in Drowning, and I feel like the atmosphere in this book is totally perfect for the fall season and for Halloween. This book is so interesting, and I'm really excited to continue this series because I really fell in love with the characters and the plot of this first book. So I'm hoping the second book is just as good, but I would definitely say this is a great fall read. And then I have one of my all-time favorites, which is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I actually believe the first time I read this, it might have been during the fall, so I feel like I associate it with the fall season anyways. But I feel like the fall is a perfect time to read dark academia, and The Secret History is one of my absolute favorite dark academia reads. There is a mystery that is being solved throughout the book and some definite dark twists and turns. So I feel like this is absolutely perfect for a spooky read that's more in an academic setting. And then the last book that I wanted to highlight in this category is the one that contains a little bit of gore and is also probably the weirdest out of the books that I'm recommending today, and that would be Bunny by Mona Awad. And honestly, Bunny is a ride. So if you don't like weird lit, you might not like this, but this was honestly one of my favorite reads when I did read it, and I still think about this book all the time. And it definitely does have some gorier aspects in it. So I feel like it's perfect for the fall season, but it's also a great book to get you thinking and questioning what they're trying to say with a lot of what's happening in this book. So not only is this one in an academic setting, but I also feel like it's one of those books that causes you to be a little bit more introspective, and it definitely has some speculative aspects to it. So I would highly recommend Bunny. It's a definite weird read, okay? I can promise you this is not everyone's cup of tea, but I loved it and I would recommend it. And then I would also like to recommend some of what I would consider to be classic Halloween books or classics that fall into the horror genre. So the first book that I would recommend in this category would be Interview with a Vampire, which this isn't technically a classic, but in my mind, this is a classic vampire novel, and I have really enjoyed Anne Rice's writing. I absolutely love this book, and if you haven't seen the movie that was made based on this, I would recommend that. I personally haven't watched the series yet, so that is something that I'm considering picking up for the fall season because I do love anything to do with vampires around this time of year. So I would definitely recommend Interview with the Vampire. And then the other two books that I want to recommend alongside this one, I have physical copies, but I couldn't find them before recording. So the first one is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and that is one of my all-time favorite classics in general. If you haven't read The Picture of Dorian Gray, it took me a long time before I actually picked it up as well. And the number one thing that I said after reading it was that I just wish I had read it sooner. So let that speak to how good the book is and maybe consider picking that up. And then the second book that I do have a physical copy of but couldn't find is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I feel like it feels a little silly to have to recommend that for this time of year, but I will say that it is a classic horror that I have revisited on multiple occasions, and I may also revisit it this fall. So it's definitely worth the reread, and it says a lot about humanity. So not only is it a horror, but it makes really, really good commentary and is very thought-provoking. So I would definitely recommend all three of those as far as classic horrors or classic literature go. And I can't make a video about fall reads without acknowledging that it's Hoa Hoa season. And if you don't know what that means, too bad. But I have been trying to piece together a new set of Twilight books for a long time. I was trying to find them in the same size in hardback from different thrift bookstores, and I just haven't had any luck. And it just so happened that for the anniversary of these books, there was a new box set coming out, so I did pick it up, and here it is. It is so pretty. The covers on these books are beautiful. Now, I will say mine did get a little damaged. I don't know if you'll see it, but it got a little damaged in shipping, which made me sad. But there was a promo with Barnes& and Noble where if you pre-ordered, you got a discount on the set. And so I did pre-order it so I could get that discount, but I wish it wasn't damaged. But I'm very excited to have a complete box set of this series again because I've been wanting to reread it. The last time I read this series, I was a teenager, so I definitely want to revisit it. And the Twilight movies are definitely something that I always revisit this time of year. They're to the point where they're so bad that they're good, and I just love them. It's super nostalgic for me because I was obsessed with Twilight when I was younger, so very happy to have a new box set of these books back in my collection. And I just realized I had one more book on my pile for Dark Academia, and that's Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, which follows students at a prestigious school that help to manage some secret societies. And I really enjoyed this book. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I also enjoyed the second book in this series. I didn't love it as much as the first one, but I didn't hate it. And I think a lot of people were pretty dramatic about their feelings about the second book. A lot of people absolutely hated it, but I really, really liked both this book and the sequel. So I would recommend these as Dark Academia picks as well. And of course, I'm gonna get to some traditional thrillers and horror books in this video. So the first author that I want to highlight is Holly Jackson. And if you haven't read any of Holly Jackson's books, I would say that she is most well known for A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I do believe that that was also made into a series, but I haven't personally seen it. But I did really enjoy A Good Girl's Guide to Murder when I read it. And I think this book is perfect if you're looking for something quick and easy that has a spooky vibe. Do I think that this is the best written book ever? No. Do I think that this is the most edge of your seat thriller I've ever read? No. But I will say, if I am in a reading slump and I just need something to pick up that's going to suck me in super quickly and that I'm going to read really fast, Holly Jackson is definitely my go-to. So if you're looking to have a fun time and to read something really quickly, I would highly recommend any of her books. I did enjoy this one, and then I recently got an arc of Not Quite Dead Yet just before that came out. It is out now, so you can get it anywhere that books are sold. but Not Quite Dead Yet was really, really fun. I loved that book, and I was really excited to see Holly Jackson do an adult thriller as opposed to young adult. And so I will say that if I was comparing the quality of the books, Not Quite Dead Yet was definitely a better read for me than A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, but they both had those same qualities of being books that I would just speed through and enjoy every second of the reading experience. So I think Holly Jackson is great to pick up during the fall. And another author I'd like to highlight is Agatha Christie. We can't talk about mysteries and thrillers without talking about the queen herself. So if you haven't read Agatha Christie, I picked up my first Agatha Christie this year. It was The Crooked House, and I thought that this was amazing. It was really fun and a super quick read, and I definitely have plans to read a lot more of her books this year. But I will say she is a great author to pick up during the fall season if you're wanting to get into some really well written mysteries where literally anyone could be the culprit. I think that's my favorite thing about her books is that I normally piece out what's going on in any thriller that I read pretty early on because a lot of authors can be pretty heavy-handed with clues, but Agatha Christie gave just enough that I figured out what was going on pretty close to when it actually got revealed. So I did still puzzle it out, but I really enjoyed that process because her writing made it so interesting. So definitely would recommend Agatha Christie if you're looking for some quick mysteries or thrillers to get into this fall. And then I've got a couple other thriller authors that I want to recommend whose books I don't physically have. But the first author would be Benjamin Stevenson, who wrote Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone and Everyone on This Train is a Suspect. And I would say that these two books are pretty non traditional in the way that they're written because it really feels like the narrator is speaking directly to you from start to finish in the book. But I found that that made for a really, really fun reading experience in both of those books. So I would definitely recommend those as well if you're wanting to try something new. And then, of course, I personally have to recommend my all time favorite thriller author, which is Taylor Adams. And the first Taylor Adams book that I read was The Last Word. And I honestly cannot recommend Taylor Adams's books enough. I found The Last Word in particular, and also his other books that I've read, to be so compelling because I was actually scared of the villain in the books. And I think that's because a lot of mysteries and thrillers are written as psychological horrors, or it's, exactly who you'd expect the villain to be, or it's someone that's unexpected, like the longtime caretaker who was a sweet old woman who ends up being the person who poisoned someone, or it's a child who mistakenly killed someone. But Taylor Adams's villains are always villains that actually scare me terribly. So in The Last Word, one of the people who our protagonist is trying to survive against is the exact description of what you would think when you think of someone who might be called a neckbeard online or an incel. And I was so incredibly uncomfortable reading about that particular character in The Last Word. I don't often have moments that make me feel like my skin is crawling, and a lot of Taylor Adams' descriptions made me feel like my skin was crawling. So, if you're actually looking for a thriller that elicits a response from you, I would highly recommend Taylor Adams. His writing in every single one of his books that I've read has given me that same feeling, and I actually have had moments where I feel like queasy because I don't know if our main character is going to make it through what they're experiencing. So, there aren't a lot of thrillers or horror novels that actually get that kind of response from me, and all of Taylor Adams' books have done that. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend him, and I do believe that he has a new book coming out soon. So I will definitely be reading that as soon as it's out because I need him to write another book. And then I feel like I have a couple of really atmospheric reads that for me bridge the gap between kind of thriller and horror or some other genres and horror. So I did want to bring up the Shepherd King duology. And these two books are by Rachel Gillig. And I will say, because The Night and the Moth wasn't my favorite read. I did read that pretty soon after it came out, and it didn't quite hit the mark with me. I just didn't connect with the characters as much. But in both this duology and The Night and the Moth, I think Rachel Gillig does an amazing job of creating an atmosphere that's very dark and moody, and I feel like a lot of her writing feels grimdark to me. It's fairy tale, but with a darker twist. So I would definitely recommend these two for spooky season. And then the other book that I would recommend, I unfortunately don't have a copy of, even though it is one of my all time favorites. And the only reason I don't have a copy is because I hate the one that they sell at the store. And I say hate with my full chest because for some reason the book is square. It's not a normal book shape and it's a paperback. And I can't stand the way that the book is sized. It just will not work on my shelves. So I'm still searching for a copy of this book. So if you know where I can get one that's not the ugly square shape, please let me know. But the book I'm referring to is Slewfoot. And the reason that I say this one is kind of an in between book for me as well is because I don't necessarily feel like this one is a story of horror. I feel like it's a story of vengeance. And I was rooting for our protagonist, who some may say is the villain, which I think if you read the book, you would know that the protagonist is not the villain, but that doesn't mean that our protagonist doesn't do some heinous things. And so I am someone who supports women's rights and women's wrongs, and Slewfoot is always going to be one of my absolute favorite reads. It is by Brahm, and again, I would call this a 6-star read, honestly. It is always at the top of my list when I'm thinking of atmospheric, spooky stories and stories that have a lot to say and have really, really meaningful through lines alongside narratives that are just really, really enjoyable to read. So I would highly recommend that as well. And then one of my other favorite authors to pick up around this time of year is Grady Hendrix. And I've read several Grady Hendrix books, and I also still have a few on my TBR. Now, I will say these aren't like they're not all the most exciting mysteries where you're on the edge of your seat, but there's something about the way that Grady Hendrix writes that really, really works well for me. And I feel like a lot of the conclusions of these books don't feel like such a gut punch as you might get with other thrillers or such a big moment of relief. And sometimes I feel like that says a lot more than having something super sensational. I'm not sure if that makes a ton of sense and if I'm articulating that well, but sometimes I really like the way that these wrap up. Some of Grady Hendrix's books do kind of pack that punch, but I've found that some of them kind of just expose an issue, and I like the way that they do that. So that might not make a lot of sense without any context whatsoever, but I don't want to spoil any Grady Hendrix books that you might pick up. So I would say that I really recommend Grady Hendrix's books this time of year. All of them that I've seen are to do with some type of horror element. One of my personal favorites was actually My Best Friend's Exorcism, because I really enjoyed the setting of that book because it was set a little bit back in the day, and I really liked all of the things that kind of went along with that. But that one also had some scenes that just made me extremely uncomfortable, which, like I said, doesn't often happen in books for me. So definitely would recommend Grady Hendrix. And that will finally bring us to my favorite 100% true horror authors. So I'm sure you're going to want me to shut up about this first one that I'm going to mention because I brought him up in several videos recently, but I recently started reading Jeff Vandermeer's work. Annihilation is my first experience with his writing, but y'all know science fiction horror is my absolute favorite, so of course this was going to be a home run for me. But I really love Jeff Vandermeer's writing, and I think it is so, so interesting. It really was thought-provoking for me, and I loved experiencing this book. It really felt like an experience. I felt very immersed in the writing, so I can't recommend Jeff Vandermeer enough if you like science fiction horror. And hopefully it comes as no surprise to you that my other top authors are going to be in a similar vein. Now, this next one is one that's kind of more recently discovered for me, which is very exciting because I love finding new authors that I enjoy. But I would also love to recommend Delilah Dawson. Delilah Dawson has another book that I've read called Guillotine, which again fell in that vein of women's rights and wrongs, and I absolutely loved that one. It was very straightforward in terms of what you can expect from a horror novel, but it was short, it was concise, and I really enjoyed it. So I would definitely recommend checking out Delilah Dawson as well. And then the last author that I want to highlight for today's video is Mira Grant. And I have read one of Mira Grant's series as well as some standalone books, which may or may not have become a series. I think there might be a prequel to the book that I'm referring to now, but at the time that I read it, it was a standalone. And again, Mira Grant writes science fiction horror, which is my favorite kind of horror. So, of course, I have to recommend her in this video. And I actually haven't gotten to Overgrowth just yet. I'm planning to get to this month in October, but it's the only physical copy of one of her books that I have, unfortunately. So, I definitely would recommend her. I loved Into the Drowning Deep, which was the book I was just referring to. That book actually has to do with killer mermaids, and there's a mystery element of figuring out why the mermaids are trying to kill people and how they're doing it. But as soon as crisis begins in that book, it is a heart-pounding thriller, and watching the way that that unfolds was super, super exciting, and I really loved that book. And then in addition to that, I also read the Parasitology trilogy, which I will say had some moments of like being silly goofy. I don't want to give too much away about the books because I did love them and I would love for you to read them and experience them for yourself for the first time without any spoilers. But just to give you a brief overview, the Parasitology trilogy has to do with tapeworms, which in the society in the book have been prescribed to people for medical purposes. So they were able to genetically alter tapeworms to serve a function in the body to help prevent disease and to solve different things that were previously incurable. So the people in the story all have tapeworms implanted in them, and sometimes that leads to things going awry. So our main character was in a pretty horrible accident and wakes up in the hospital but doesn't remember any of her family. And so you're trying to understand what has happened to her while the rest of the world is also kind of starting to have some issues related to these tapeworms. So that was another book and book series that made me physically uncomfortable, literally made my skin crawl, because there was a lot being talked about with tapeworms and how they were in people's bodies, and just a very, very uncomfortable read, but so extremely well done if you're looking for something in the horror genre. Again, there are some silly, goofy parts. There's one particular character called Tansy who I just felt like was a little over the top and a little crazy, but from start to finish, I really did enjoy that trilogy a lot. So I really can't recommend Mira Grant enough. But I will say, those are all the books that I wanted to share with you today. I hope you found some inspiration for some fall reads, maybe an author you haven't read or heard of before. And I would really love some recommendations. If you have favorite horror or thriller authors, please leave them down below. Or if there's a favorite thriller or horror that you've read, I would love to know because these are two of my favorite genres, and I'm always looking to try new authors that fall into these categories or new books that fall into these categories. So please tell me down in the comments. I implore you. I want to continue to expand my horizons. So I would love to hear what you have to say. And I do want to just acknowledge I didn't talk about Stephen King in this video, and I feel like I don't necessarily need to talk about Stephen King in this video. You probably know that he has written a lot of books and that they are very good, but I would also recommend Stephen King. I personally have read more of his non-horror books. So he has like some crime thrillers and some mysteries, and of course, fairy tale, which I feel is kind of hard to categorize. So I can't give specific recommendations about his true horror novels, but I am starting to read more of those this season. So hopefully, I'll be able to give some more recommendations for those soon. But I have loved everything that I've read by him, and I do think he is an amazing writer. So I would recommend his books as well, just as a little side note, even though I didn't really talk about him in this video. But that being said, thank you so much for hanging out with me and yapping about all things fall. Don't forget to leave me your recommendations down below because I will be looking for them. And although I don't need inspiration to add more books to my TBR, I'm definitely always willing to consider adding something new to my TBR, especially if I get it as a recommendation from someone else and they're excited about the book. So please do leave those down below. But thank you so much for watching today's video. As always, I hope you have an amazing day and I appreciate you. Bye!